Good evening, it's the Daily Digest, and Isaiah tells us that God is big. Who's measured the water in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and hills in a balance? Right? With the span, thinking in terms of a ruler, and of course the span of a man's hand, using it as a measurement back in the ancient world, but just amazing, amazing, right? The hollow of your hand, all of that. Of course not. No man has, at least. Who's directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor has taught him, right? No one teaches God anything. He doesn't learn anything. There's no surprises for him. He's quite different in this way, right? He is the origin of counsel. He is the origin of wisdom. He is the origin of truth. He's the origin of knowledge. He is the origin of all that can be known or is known. It ever was, will be, and is. Just a big picture, of who and what God is, and we can lose sight of that. And there are whole theologies these days that seem built upon losing sight of this. Behold, the nations are as a drop in the bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Right, just the dust doesn't make a difference. When you're doing when like that, or a drop in a bucket, right, making no difference. And yet we don't act that way, think that way, feel that way, behave that way, react that way. That the nations are nothing in comparison to him, and I'm guilty of that, just as much as the rest of you are. Behold, he taketh up the isles as a very little thing. That's interesting. The isles, of course, being typically associated with the Gentiles. And Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beast thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. So at Lebanon, that whole area was very prosperous. A lot of animals, a lot of forests, a lot of the cedar trees. They're famous for their cedars of Lebanon. Like if you took all those trees in the forests and all the beasts that live there and all the livestock too among that nation, and all burnt them off as a big sacrifice, it's not sufficient. Just understanding how much bigger God is, and just vanity in the sense of smoke, just nothing in comparison. And yet he does deign to condescend to save us and to love us and care for us, each of us individually as well as corporately. And that is astounding. And it's just this important point of just how big God is, and how if we were anything like that, anything close to that, which you can't really be close to infinity and being finite. But if we had a lot of power like that, a lot of knowledge like that, would we be humble? Would we be loving like God is towards us and towards all his creation? Of course, all of that is bound up in God. You can't sever his love from his power, from his wisdom. He's all God. And anything that would be, if he lacked the love to match his knowledge, it would be deficient knowledge, or his love would be deficient if he didn't have perfect knowledge like that. It's all bound up. But anyway, beautiful theology from Isaiah. 1 Peter 1, call to sobriety, right? Gird up your loins, gird up the loins of your mind, and that's when you're ready for action. Art of Manliness has a great diagram of what girding up the loins meant, right? If you wore a robe back in the old days, it was a way of kind of tying it up so you could run, fight, do action. And it's time to get it on, right? Get your game face on. Gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober. All right, take this seriously. Hope to the end for the grace that is brought unto you by the revelation of Jesus Christ. So hope to the end. There's always hope. Hoping always to the very end. Our death, right? Also the end of time when Christ comes back, and then the grace that is brought unto you. So there's a grace we have now, we always need and rely upon, and then it will be fulfilled in the final day. That's been revealed in Jesus Christ to us. Again, this call to fight against temptation and endure trials as obedient children, not fasten yourselves according to the former lust of your ignorance, right? Don't go back you were before, living in worldliness and sin, but be holy, and even in all manner conversation, Conversation, talking, not just in speech in this older understanding. I'm using the King James. I'm sure there's a different translation, but all your interactions, but also certainly the tongue is very important, and how it's used. And then a quote, right? Be holy, for I'm holy. If you call on the Father, right? If He's your Father, be like His child. Um, and sojourning here in fear. So we're sojourning through a wilderness as well, not unlike Israel. And in our pilgrimage here on earth, we're looking for the heavenly city, and we go there in a way that's fitting of that. We have a job to do, and then we'll go home. And we're on our way home in the middle of doing that job. We're not redeemed by corruptible things, silver and gold, um, from your vain tradition received, your vain conversation, your way of life and talk received by tradition from your fathers. And I think this is particular. Is this pointing more towards a Gentile audience, or is it just a correction of Jewish ones as well? I almost kind of think it's at least with that. And I don't study before I look into these things. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's one of those things I do differently if I were doing this as a Bible study, right, or as a sermon. But with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. So, who verily was foreordained. There's again foreordination before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you. We've been in the last times since this, since the incarnation. Who by him do believe in God that raised him from the dead and gave him glory, right? We're talking about, again, the Father. That your faith and hope might be in God, right? If God's good on those promises, however enough to do it, put your faith and hope there. Purifying your souls through and obeying the truth. So truth is important here. Obey that truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren. So truth from the Spirit through the Spirit, resulting in love for the brothers. See that you love one another with a pure heart fervently. Being born again, there's regeneration, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible by the word of God. This is often why you see old writings and old treatises and good old theology, and myself too, talking a lot about baptism as a planting of a seed, the seed of the word of God, of the gospel, right? And what soil does it find in the heart that receives it? It varies, just like Jesus said it would. And so I find that, corruptible versus incorruptible, the being born again, baptism, regeneration, this is a helpful verse to actually help understand that. M.F. Sadler, I think, makes a similar point. All flesh is grass. Glory of man is the flower of grass. Grass withers, the flower fades. We've been talking about that. But the word of the Lord endures forever. This is the word which by the gospel is preached unto you. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful, and kind of connecting that from the last time we read from First Peter 1, with the fading nature of man, and tying that again to Isaiah, the vanity of man. Man passes away; it's brief. The nations even are a drop in the bucket. So think about that. Think about our smallness and God's bigness, but also that shouldn't be necessarily disconcerting. It's good news as well.